Welcome on board, Chosen One. You showed up, but let's tell the truth, you've been gone for a long time. And the funniest part? The enemy still hasn't figured out the exact moment you slipped out of their grip. They think you drifted away. They think it was distance. They think it was miscommunication. Cute. The real reason is way colder. You outgrew the nonsense, mapped your escape with precision, and left them standing in a spotlight they never deserved. Your silence wasn't confusion. It was strategy. Your calm wasn't weakness. It was the countdown. And the way they're panicking now, that's the sound of someone realizing the person they underestimated was actually the one running the entire operation from the start. Press the like button and subscribe to pay this message back. Now, Chosen One, let's tighten the grip. Let's make this even more uncomfortable for the enemies watching from the shadows. Because you didn't just leave, you pulled off a masterclass in controlled exit. You created an atmosphere so still, so eerily calm, that even the universe paused to watch what you'd do next. The world around you shifted. People who used to talk over you suddenly went quiet. The ones who dismissed you suddenly studied your every move. And the ones who played games started acting like they lost the rule book. You ever notice how after a storm, the air feels heavier? That's exactly how your exit hit them. The dust settled, and there you were, untouchable, unbothered, rebuilt from the inside out, while they were still trying to understand what chapter you're in. Your enemies are replaying old conversations like surveillance footage. They're scanning memories like detectives desperate to catch a clue. They're whispering in rooms you're no longer in, trying to figure out how someone they thought was emotional suddenly operated like a strategist with a blueprint. And here's the exposed truth. They never realized you were studying them the entire time. Their patterns, their lies, their cycles, their manipulation. While they were busy performing, you were busy documenting. While they thought they were leading the dance, you were choreographing the exit. Let's get even closer to the bone. What you did is something psychologists study. It's called strategic withdrawal, but honestly, you turned it into an art form. You didn't panic. You didn't announce your pain. You didn't expose your next move. You simply reorganized your emotions, packed your self-respect in a quiet little carry-on bag, and walked out mentally months before your feet followed. People like you don't leave loudly, because you know loud exits give weak people excuses. You left with the kind of silence that haunts them, the kind that forces them to face themselves, the kind that exposes who they are without you covering up the cracks. And don't think I don't know the exact moment you started planning. It wasn't during a fight. It wasn't during a breakdown. It was during one of those boring, quiet evenings when they made you feel invisible, when you realized you'd been holding everything together alone, when you saw the truth in full HD. That was your turning point. The moment the switch flipped, that's when you stopped waiting for them to care and started preparing for your exit like a villain sharpening the final blade. Let's hit them harder. The ones who mistreated you are now dealing with the emptiness of their own actions. Your absence exposed their weakness. Your silence exposed their need for chaos. Your growth exposed how small they always were. And now, they're terrified. Not because you left, but because you left with your dignity, your intelligence, your self-control, and their secrets still untouched in your mind. You didn't just escape. You protected yourself like someone who finally remembered their worth. Let me take you deeper. Think back to the past. Remember the times you stayed quiet just so the peace wouldn't break. Remember the moments you swallowed pain because you didn't want to start a war. Remember how you dimmed yourself so someone else wouldn't feel insecure. You survived all of that. You tolerated things that would have shattered most people, and somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, you still had enough strength left to plan a clean exit. You didn't run. You outsmarted. You didn't collapse. You evolved. You didn't lose yourself. You protected the version of you that the universe has been waiting to unleash. What you did wasn't random. It wasn't emotional. It was a calculated shift powered by self-awareness. You executed an escape that deserves recognition because not everyone survives manipulation with their sanity intact. But you did. You outmaneuvered people who thought you were easy to control. You outclassed people who thought they understood you. You liberated yourself without starting a war, and that's what terrifies them. You're standing in the aftermath now. The battlefield is behind you. The lessons are carved into your backbone. The universe is clearing a path in front of you that doesn't require you to shrink ever again. Your exit wasn't just an exit. It was a declaration, a warning, a transformation. And this intro, this is only the first layer of the truth you're about to hear. And Chosen One, before we go any further, I need you locked in. You pulled off an exit so smooth it should have rolled during the credits of a blockbuster, and now we're about to break down exactly how you did it. If you're really ready to study your own masterpiece, drop a 777 in the comments to mark the start of your transformation. Consider it your signature on the contract for the sequel. And while you're here, hit the like button and subscribe, so this message keeps reaching people who walked out of their old life with the same silent precision you did. Stay with me, because the real chosen ones always feel the pull. They feel that strange spark in their chest when truth is about to unfold. And trust me, once you hear what's coming next, you won't want to blink. You executed your exit like a legend, and now we're about to study it, scene by scene. Let's step into the next act. Number 1. They never lost you. You let them think they owned the stage. The biggest embarrassment for your enemy is realizing the one they thought they controlled was quietly writing the script behind their back. You didn't ghost anybody. You didn't disappear out of nowhere. You didn't crumble, break down, or run. You did something far more humiliating to them. You let them believe they still had control. You let them think they were the lead actor while you were already backstage, rewriting the entire show. They thought you were confused, emotional, dependent. Meanwhile, you were calmly preparing your exit like a villain who already knew the final scene. Every move you made was calculated. Every silence was intentional. Every moment you played along was a piece of your escape plan. They thought they were manipulating you, but they were only performing in a movie you directed. And here's the part that really crushes them. You didn't take their power. You let them hand it to you. Your silence wasn't fear. It was dominance. Your calm wasn't weakness. It was evidence you'd already detached. Chosen One, you didn't ghost them. You staged their illusion. You crafted a false reality so smooth they never saw the trapdoor open beneath them. They were busy admiring their own reflection, convinced you were still under their thumb. Meanwhile, you were slipping out the back door with your dignity packed neatly like a priceless artifact. But let's go deeper, because I know the question in your mind: how did I play it so well without losing myself? Because you're not regular. You're not built like the people who break loudly. You're built like the ones who escape silently. You don't fight battles that drain you. You win them by outsmarting the enemy without letting them smell the strategy. You observed their patterns, their lies, their recycled tricks, their predictable moods. You learned the rhythm of their manipulation until it became background noise, and once you decoded them, they had nothing left to surprise you with. That's when you started your emotional exit. Think about it. You didn't detach overnight. It happened in layers. First, you stopped reacting, then you stopped expecting, then you stopped hoping, and finally, you stopped caring. By the time your physical body left the room, the real you had already walked out months before. That's not deception, that's survival. That's intelligence sharpened by disappointment. That's you reclaiming your power in the quietest, most surgical way possible. And let's be honest, if you had confronted them early, they would have turned it into chaos. They would have twisted your words, gaslit your truth, played the victim, flipped the script, and dragged you through emotional mud just to keep control. You knew that. You knew any loud exit would be used against you, so you chose boredom as your weapon. You chose silence as your shield. You chose indifference as your strategy. You offered them nothing to grip onto, nothing to argue with, nothing to provoke, nothing to feed on. That's why they're spiraling now. That's why they're obsessing. That's why they're replaying every conversation like detectives reviewing footage of a heist, because you didn't leave them a dramatic finale. You left them nothing. And there is nothing more painful to a manipulator than being denied the chaos they feed on. You turned the whole relationship into a scene with no climax, no explosion, no final showdown, just their ego collapsing into dead air. That silence, that was the punch they never recovered from. Here's what hits them the hardest. You let them think they still had you. You responded just enough for them to stay comfortable. You gave them crumbs of attention while keeping your full self tucked away. You let them think their tricks were working, but you were only observing, studying, preparing. They thought they were directing the emotional tone, but you were the one setting the lighting, adjusting the angles, and choosing which scenes made it to the final cut. They thought you were emotionally dependent, but you were emotionally documenting. They thought you were trying to fix things, but you were fixing your exit route. They thought you were waiting for them to change, but you were changing your future lineup, removing them from the cast entirely. Metaphorically speaking, you weren't the prisoner. You were the undercover agent escaping the dungeon while smiling through the bars. You were already 10 steps ahead while they were still bragging about their control. That slow leak of emotional detachment. That was your jailbreak in progress. Now look at them, confused, off balance, checking your old messages like they contain hidden codes, replaying arguments, trying to see if you dropped clues, telling their friends, "I don't know what happened," when deep down they do. They sensed you pulling away. They sensed the shift. They ignored it because arrogance blinded them, and now the consequences are eating them alive. But let's talk about you for a second. I know you've wondered, did I do the right thing by leaving quietly? Yes. Let me make this simple. You did the only thing a genius-level survivor could do. You protected your peace. You protected your future. You protected your sanity. Loud exits satisfy the ego. Quiet ones change the entire trajectory of your life. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left to save yourself. And that makes your exit even more powerful. They're hurt because they lost access. They're hurting because they lost the version of you they never deserved. They're hurting because they finally felt the emptiness that you carried alone for so long. And let's drop another truth bomb. Their biggest nightmare wasn't you walking away. It was you waking up. It was you realizing your value. It was you recognizing the game. It was you cracking the code. Once you saw the truth behind their performance, the illusion shattered, and no manipulator survives a shattering. Chosen one, you didn't ghost them. You dissolved the entire fantasy they built around controlling you. You slipped out of the chains without making a sound. You escaped their emotional maze with elegance. You pulled off the cleanest exit of your life. That wasn't luck. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't an accident. That was execution. Flawless, surgical, Oscar-worthy. And now you're free. Now the stage is yours. And your next act is going to make everything they did look like the weakest plot twist in the universe. Number 2, you stopped bleeding. And that's when they lost their feeding tube. Nothing exposes a fake supporter faster than your healing. Some people don't love you. They love the version of you that hurts. Your pain was their power source, and your healing was the blackout. The day you stopped suffering for them was the day their entire empire collapsed. Chosen one, let's stop pretending this was some tragic love story gone wrong. It was a feeding cycle, a parasite masquerading as a partner, a crowd that only gathered when you fell, never when you rose. And the moment you stopped bleeding for them, everything they built on top of your pain started crumbling like a cheap prop in a low-budget film. You didn't just stop trying. You stopped letting people feast on your misery like it was entertainment. You stopped giving them front-row seats to your breakdowns, and they hated that. Because for the first time, they realized they couldn't survive without your suffering. Imagine this. A vampire panicking because the blood supply dried up. That's exactly how they reacted when your healing started. But let's slow it down, because I know the question burning in your mind. Was I really surrounded by people who preferred me broken? Yes, and you felt it long before you admitted it. Think back. Every time something good happened to you, their face went stiff. Every time you spoke confidently, they got quiet. Every time you started to get better, they pulled back, acted distant, or suddenly found things to criticize. You didn't misread that. You didn't imagine that. That was real. See, some people can only handle you when you're beneath them, drained, unsure of yourself. Your confusion gives them clarity. Your insecurity gives them confidence. Your pain gives them purpose. When you hurt, they felt needed. But when you healed, they had nothing left to offer you. That's when their mask slipped. Imagine this. You're climbing out of a pit, and instead of cheering for you, they pull out a chair, sit down, and watch like it's a show. That's what they were doing. They weren't helping. They were observing, waiting, feeding, taking notes on exactly how much suffering you'd tolerate. Let's hit even harder. They didn't want you strong. They wanted you manageable. And the strong version of you, the one you're becoming now, they would have never survived her. That version can't be manipulated, can't be guilt-tripped, can't be controlled with silent treatment, mixed signals, or emotional crumbs. The healed you destroys their entire strategy. That's why they preferred the bleeding version of you, the crying version, the apologizing version, the version of you that thought love meant self-sacrifice, the version of you that kept showing up for people who couldn't even show basic respect. But, chosen one, you woke up. Finally. And the moment you recognized that your pain was never an accident, but a condition they preferred, everything changed. That's when you stopped explaining yourself. You stopped shrinking your voice. You stopped justifying your emotions. You stopped accepting apologies followed by repeated offenses. You stopped performing emotional CPR on people who would have stepped over your unconscious body if it meant avoiding accountability. You stopped bleeding. And that's when they panicked. Imagine a predator suddenly realizing their prey learned how to fight back. Not just fight back, but walk away entirely. Imagine the silence that falls when someone realizes the person they used to drain is now untouchable. Now here's another question that might be echoing in your mind. Did I overreact by pulling back? Not even close. You responded exactly the way self-aware, self-respecting people respond when they finally see the truth. You didn't withdraw because you lost love. You withdrew because you gained perspective. You didn't stop giving because you became cold. You stopped giving because you realized they were taking without ever giving back. You didn't walk away because you were bitter. You walked away because you were done starring in a horror movie and pretending it was romance. Let's go deeper. Imagine this. You're drowning and calling for help, and instead of pulling you out of the water, they lean over and ask you to lower your voice. That's what your relationship with them was like. Every time you needed help, they turned your pain into an inconvenience. But when they needed something, suddenly you were the most important person in the room. Their love only worked when you were suffering, because suffering made you compliant. Healing made you powerful. And here's what really exposes them. Pay attention to who stuck around when your life got calm, when your problems got solved, when you didn't have drama to share, when you weren't crying on the phone at 2 a.m. How many people stayed? How many still checked in? How many still cared when your life stopped entertaining them? Not many, because that crowd wasn't attracted to your presence. They were addicted to your pain. You were their emotional outlet, their emotional punching bag, their emotional charger. When you stopped providing the fuel, they stopped showing up. And this is where your power truly began. Your exit wasn't loud. You didn't curse anyone out or announce your healing like some dramatic monologue. You just quietly stopped handing people the knife they kept cutting you with. You stopped participating in your own mistreatment. Your detachment didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. The kind of clarity that changes everything. The kind that hits you like a cold wind in the middle of the night, reminding you that you deserve more than being someone's emotional backup generator. You started noticing who cared about your joy, not just your tears, who supported your growth, not just your breakdowns, who celebrated your wins, not just your struggles, and when you looked around, the room got emptier. But that emptiness wasn't loss. It was freedom. Your healing exposed the people who were never meant to stay in the first place. And here's the part that stings them the most. When you stopped bleeding for them, you didn't ask for anything back. You didn't beg. You didn't chase. You didn't demand apologies. You just took back your energy like it belonged to you the whole time. You didn't leave a mess. You didn't leave a note. You didn't leave a piece of yourself behind. You left clean. You healed clean. And now they're the ones bleeding. Bleeding from the wound caused by losing someone who used to pour life into them. Bleeding from the emptiness that used to be filled by your empathy. Bleeding from the realization that the person they took for granted became the person they can never replace. Your absence became their punishment. Your healing became their mirror. Your strength became their regret. And here's the final truth they'll never admit. They didn't lose someone weak. They lost someone they depended on. They lost someone who carried the emotional weight of the entire connection. They lost someone whose pain kept them powerful. They lost someone whose healing made them irrelevant. Chosen one, once you stop bleeding, you stop belonging to them. And that's when your story finally began. Number 3, you let them think you were lost while you were quietly stealing the whole game. The most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows more than they admit. Never underestimate someone who stays silent. Silence is where revolutions are born. You didn't play dumb, you played strategic. They were celebrating a victory you never agreed to fight for. Chosen one, Let's drag the truth into the light with no mercy. You didn't miss the signs. You didn't fail to catch on. You didn't trust too easily. You observed quietly, like someone studying a crime scene, collecting evidence, waiting for the exact second to move. They thought your silence meant ignorance, when in reality it meant calculation. You weren't clueless, you were giving them rope, and they hung themselves with it. You played dumb because you needed time. Time to understand their cycles. Time to decode their intentions. Time to detach piece by piece without alerting their ego. Imagine this: a spy smiling politely at the enemy's dinner table while memorizing every exit route in the building. That was you. You were mentally packing your bags while they bragged about how loyal you were. They thought they had you hooked, molded, predictable. Meanwhile, you were rehearsing your escape like the main character who already knows the final scene. And here's the gut punch they'll never recover from. You didn't just leave. You left with everything they thought you lost. Your peace, your confidence, your identity, your clarity, all of it was quietly gathered while they were too busy underestimating you to notice. They thought you were breaking down, but you were breaking free. They thought you were confused, but you were calculating. They thought you were soft, but you were storing power like a storm waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I know what you might be thinking. Did I go too far pretending I didn't know? No. You went exactly far enough. When dealing with people who weaponize your emotions, silence becomes your shield. Acting unaware becomes your armor. Pretending to be confused becomes your camouflage. You weren't trying to fool them. You were protecting yourself from the explosion they would have caused if they realized you were slipping away. Imagine this: a chess master letting the opponent think they're winning while quietly setting up the final checkmate. That's what your stillness was: strategic, deadly, genius. They were laughing behind your back, bragging about their control, convinced they'd broken you down into something small and manageable. Meanwhile, you were memorizing every lie they told, every shift in their tone, every inconsistency in their behavior. You weren't passive, you were documenting. You weren't naive, you were studying. You weren't scared, you were preparing. And when the moment came, you vanished without a ripple. That's why your exit cut so deep. There was no chaos, no shouting, no begging, no warning. You simply walked out like you were leaving a room that no longer matched your worth. Quiet, controlled, unshakable. Imagine this: a phantom slipping out of a locked cage without ever touching the bars. That's how clean your escape was. They never saw it coming because people who depend on your weakness always misread your silence. They confused your patience for stupidity. They mistook your observation for obedience. They thought you were stuck because they were too arrogant to notice you'd already stopped caring. By the time they realized what you were doing, you were already gone. Not just physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically gone. You had already reclaimed everything they once drained from you. Your voice came back stronger. Your mind came back clearer. Your confidence returned like it never left. You didn't just exit, you upgraded. And now they're scrambling through old memories like detectives trying to solve a mystery they caused. They're replaying your last conversations, hoping to spot the clues. They're calling your old softness, hoping it answers. They're panicking because they can't find the version of you they used to control. But that version died the moment you realized silence was your power. Your vanishing act wasn't disrespect. It was self-respect, finally waking up. You didn't run because you were scared. You left because you were done. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you were finished performing. They lost someone they never deserved. You regained someone they never expected, yourself, and the silence you left behind. That silence is the loudest message you've ever sent. Number 4. You didn't leave them hanging. You left them staring at their own damage. Silence isn't avoidance. Silence is a verdict. A manipulator doesn't fear losing you. They fear losing access to you. Closure is not owed, it's earned, and they never earned a word. The loudest goodbye is the one delivered without sound. Chosen one, this part is brutal, but you already lived it, so let's tear the truth open clean. You didn't deny them closure, you denied them another doorway back into your life. They weren't waiting for understanding, they were waiting for an opening. They wanted one more long paragraph to twist into a weapon, one more emotional crack they could crawl through, one more final conversation they could rewrite to make themselves the victim. But you didn't give them that. You gave them nothing, because nothing is exactly what they gave you when it mattered. Imagine this: a magician waiting for the audience to clap, unaware the room emptied 15 minutes ago. That's them, staring at their phone, expecting a dramatic finale, not realizing you already walked off stage and took your spotlight with you. You weren't scared of confrontation, you were done with repetition. They had 10 chances, then 20, then 50, and they wasted everyone thinking you'd never actually leave. And I know you've asked yourself, did I owe them at least a conversation? No. You owed them nothing they didn't give you. They never gave you truth when you needed it. They never gave you effort when you deserved it. They never gave you accountability when the damage was fresh. So why give them an ending when they never respected the journey? You weren't withholding closure, you were withholding access. They didn't want your explanation, they wanted control of the narrative. They weren't hoping for honesty, they were hoping for a loophole. That's why you walked away quietly. Because you already knew every word you spoke would be twisted, minimized, or turned against you. Instead of a speech, you handed them a mirror. And manipulative people crumble when forced to face themselves without someone to blame. Your silence exposed everything they tried to hide. It showed them the truth they spent years avoiding. They weren't a victim. They were the reason they weren't abandoned. They were cut off. They didn't get ghosted. They got confronted in the one language they can't manipulate. And what destroyed them wasn't your exit. It was the way you executed it. No screaming, no paragraphs, no regret. Just a clean, surgical disappearance that left them choking on their own accountability. That silence. It was the first time they actually felt what they put you through. And trust me, it hit harder than any goodbye ever could. Number 5. You weren't running. You were pulled out like a high-value target in a secret extraction. When the universe wants you out, it burns every bridge you were too loyal to walk away from. Some endings aren't emotional. They're evacuations. What you called falling apart was actually everything falling into place to expose the truth. You weren't losing them, you were being removed from the trap. Chosen one, let's strip away the fantasy. You didn't escape. You were removed, like someone whose value was too high to stay trapped in a corrupt system. Nothing about your exit was random. The timing, the breakdowns, the sudden clarity, that wasn't coincidence. That was the universe grabbing you by the collar and dragging you out of a psychological war zone. You were too loyal, too blinded, too hopeful to leave on your own. You weren't just emotionally tired, you were spiritually suffocating. You were stuck in a connection designed to dim you, drain you, and dismantle you. They weren't feeding off your time. They were feeding off your essence. That's why you felt smaller the longer you stayed. That's why your intuition kept screaming while your heart kept defending the very people hurting you. That's why none of it made sense until you were finally out. Imagine this: a soldier trapped behind enemy lines who doesn't even realize how dangerous their situation is until the extraction team crashes through the door and drags them out. That's what happened to you. You were deep in manipulation, deep in confusion, deep in self-doubt, and the universe had to knock everything over to wake you up. Every lie exposed, every mask that fell, every strange shift in energy. Those weren't breakdowns. They were breadcrumbs leading you to the exit route. And I know the question that eats at you sometimes: why did everything fall apart so suddenly? Because if things stayed comfortable, you never would have left. Because if they stayed charming, you never would have questioned. Because if the universe didn't shake the ground, you would have kept sacrificing yourself for people who were proud to watch you bleed. You weren't crazy. You were trapped. Your mind was shrinking. Your confidence was fading. Your identity was dissolving by the day. And you didn't walk out because of strength. You walked out because the universe forced a clarity you couldn't unsee. Once your eyes opened, the spell broke. Once the spell broke, their control shattered. Once their control shattered, you saw the cage for what it really was. Imagine this: you walk out and suddenly the air feels different. You breathe deeper. Things feel lighter. Your thoughts get sharper. Your intuition gets louder. That wasn't healing. That was recovery from captivity. And here's the villain-level truth they'll never admit. They didn't lose you because you escaped. They lost you because they no longer had the power to keep you trapped. You were extracted. You were pulled out. You were lifted from something that was draining the life out of you while convincing you it was connection. And the best part? You didn't come out empty-handed. You came out with your clarity. You came out with your self-worth. You came out with your power. You came out with every piece of yourself they tried to steal. While they're still running their mouth about your exit, you're breathing fresh air, building a new life, and watching the universe replace everything you lost with something stronger. You didn't escape. You were rescued. You were extracted. You were chosen for survival. And now you're free enough to finally become who you were meant to be. Number 6. You let them get cozy, just so you could erase them with one move. The easiest person to destroy is the one who thinks you'd never dare to leave. Comfort is the coffin manipulators build for themselves. I played small because I was studying the floor plan. Never mistake my silence for surrender. It was the countdown. Chosen one, let's peel this truth back without mercy. You didn't stay because you were powerless. You stayed because you were smart enough to know that walking out too early gives the enemy time to chase you. You didn't make yourself smaller to please them. You did it so you could move undetected. You kept the room calm, not because you feared them, but because you feared wasting energy on people unworthy of your fire. You were the storm pretending to be a quiet breeze, waiting for the perfect second to strike. You knew who you were dealing with. People who only respect dominance. People who need to feel superior to function. People who crumble when they lose control, so you let them think they had it. You let them feel safe. You let them get lazy, predictable, arrogant. Imagine this: a hunter bragging about their strength while the animal they're chasing is already behind them, watching with full awareness. That was you. They mistook your patience for softness while you were memorizing every angle of the situation. And I know the question that creeps into your mind sometimes. Did I fake too much? Did I lose myself trying to survive? No, you didn't fake anything. You adapted. You survived. You played your role with the precision of someone who understood exactly how dangerous these people were. You knew fighting every insult would drain you. You knew reacting to every jab would feed their ego. You knew the only way out was silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of strategy. You watched them. You noted their patterns. You said less, moved less, revealed less. You learned how to exist beside chaos without absorbing it. And once you figured out the structure of the trap, you realized the trap was never strong. It was psychological. The moment you stopped shrinking, the moment you remembered who you were, the trap dissolved. Then you made your move. No warning, no apology, no dramatic scene for them to feed off. You just vanished with your dignity, zipped into your emotional suitcase. Imagine their shock. A dictator waking up to an empty kingdom, realizing the people they controlled walked out while they slept. That's exactly what you did. You turned their comfort into their downfall. Your exit was so clean, it felt surgical. They didn't even feel the cut until after you were gone. That's why they're confused now. That's why they keep replaying the past, like investigators trying to find fingerprints. They swear they didn't see the signs, but the signs were there. They just didn't think you had the power to act on them. And here's the part that will always haunt them. They spent all their time trying to dominate you, but you were the one who controlled the ending. They treated you like an accessory, and you walked away like the architect. They thought you were stuck, and you proved you were observing. You didn't make them irrelevant with revenge. You made them irrelevant by outgrowing them. Your absence became the punishment. Your silence became the closure. Your peace became the consequence. And now they're left staring at the empty space where your energy used to be, finally realizing that the person they underestimated was the one running the entire game. You didn't leave loud, you left legendary. Number 7. You didn't leave quietly. You left, and the whole room fell apart. A storm doesn't announce itself when it leaves. It simply takes the weather with it. Some people don't realize who the anchor was until the ship starts sinking. Your silence wasn't empty. It was an extinction event. You didn't walk out of their world. Their world collapsed when you did. Chosen One, let's go straight for the jugular. You didn't need to make a scene because you were the scene. You were the presence holding the entire atmosphere together while they were too self-absorbed to notice. You didn't leave with fireworks, warnings, or cinematic speeches. You left like power always leaves, quietly, decisively, without asking permission. And that's exactly why it hit them so violently. They expected noise, they expected tears, they expected one last emotional monologue they could twist into a new cycle, but you starved them instead. You gave them nothing to argue with, nothing to manipulate, nothing to spin into their own narrative. You just stopped feeding the dynamic, and the dynamic died on its own. Imagine this. A party where everyone swears they're having fun until the real source of the vibe slips out the back door. Suddenly, the music feels off. The laughter sounds strained. The room gets colder. That's what your exit did. You exposed the truth. They weren't the ones making anything work. They were freeloading off your presence the entire time. And I know the doubt that sometimes creeps in. Was my exit too quiet? Should I have said something? No. The quiet was the point. Loud exits give small people room to perform. Silent exits force them to face themselves. Your calm detachment was the slap they never recovered from. You didn't need to scream. Your absence became the echo. They always assumed you'd stay because you were the one who held everything together. You fixed things, you softened blows, you absorbed chaos, you kept peace that wasn't even yours to maintain. They confused your grace with dependence. They mistook your loyalty for blindness. They assumed you'd keep choosing them over yourself. So when you finally stopped participating, when you stepped out of the role they built around you, the entire structure collapsed because you were the structure. You weren't just part of the room. You were the gravitational center. Without you, everything lost shape. And now, look at them, trying to recreate your vibe, trying to replace your presence, trying to act unfazed while their entire atmosphere malfunctions. The room feels colder because you took the warmth with you. The conversations feel shallow because you carried the depth. The energy feels dead because you were the pulse. You didn't have to break anything on your way out. You just had to leave. And the silence that followed said everything they refused to hear when you were still there. You weren't the guest, you weren't the extra, you weren't the background, you were the stage, and they're still standing there, confused, wondering why the spotlight doesn't work anymore. Number 8. You didn't break the trauma bond. You turned it into an expiration notice they never saw coming. The moment the pattern got boring was the moment the spell broke. You weren't in love, you were in survival mode, disguised as devotion. Chaos only feels like connection when someone has trained your heart to confuse pain with attention. Trauma bonds don't end with closure. They end when the chosen one stops responding. Chosen one, let's rip this open with precision. You didn't heal the trauma bond the way people think healing looks. You dismantled it. You deconstructed it like someone finally reading the fine print of a contract they never should have signed. You turned a toxic loop into a countdown clock, and every day you gained awareness, another second ticked off that clock. Trauma bonds are psychological traps. They trick you into thinking the person who hurts you is the only one who can comfort you. The highs were addictive, the lows were devastating, and the cycle carved itself into your nervous system like graffiti. You weren't attached, you were chemically conditioned. But here's where your power kicked in. You started seeing the pattern instead of losing yourself in it. Imagine this, watching the same movie over and over and suddenly realizing the plot is terrible. That's what happened. One day you saw the whole thing clearly. The recycled apologies, the predictable chaos, the cheap "I love you" after every wound. Once you saw the pattern, you couldn't unsee it. That's when the bond started dying. And I know you've wondered, why didn't I leave sooner? Because a trauma bond isn't based on logic. It's based on emotional training. They conditioned you to associate instability with intimacy. But the second you stopped reacting and started observing, the illusion cracked. You began rationing your attention. You stopped arguing because you knew the script. You stopped explaining because explanations never mattered to someone who benefits from pretending not to understand. You didn't pull away all at once. You pulled away piece by piece. Every insult you didn't respond to, every manipulation you didn't fall for, every fake promise you didn't emotionally invest in was another thread of the trauma bond snapping. You turned every heartbreak into evidence. You turned every lie into data. You turned every emotional ambush into a warning sign. And eventually, something inside you shifted. The person who once cried, begged, tolerated, and made excuses evaporated. You didn't respond one day, not because you were numb, but because the cycle finally disgusted you. You weren't triggered. You weren't emotional. You were bored, and boredom is the death of a trauma bond. Imagine this, a villain losing their power the second the hero stops reacting. They press the same buttons, tell the same lies, offer the same promises, expecting the same reaction, and nothing happens. That silence, that calm, that indifference, that's the expiration date hitting 0. They'll try everything to reignite the bond. They'll bring nostalgia. They'll bring guilt. They'll bring fake growth. They'll promise to be everything you once begged for, but you can't unsee the cage after you've walked out of it. You tasted peace, and peace rewired you. Chaos no longer feels exciting. It feels cheap. Manipulation no longer feels like passion. It feels predictable. Their emotional roller coaster no longer impresses you. It makes you nauseous. And here's the truth that seals the coffin. The only version of you that ever stayed in that trauma bond was the version of you who didn't know better. That version is gone, buried, outgrown, evolved. The person standing in your place now, they don't mistake highs and lows for love. They don't chase the people who cut them. They don't romanticize dysfunction. They build peace. They guard their energy. They choose themselves. You didn't just break the trauma bond, chosen one. You turned it into an expiration date, and when the time came, you walked out without flinching. Number 9. The comeback that didn't need an audience, because you became the whole experience. Your silence wasn't absence, it was incubation. Real comebacks don't echo, they radiate. You didn't rise to be seen. You rose because sinking was no longer compatible with who you were becoming. A legend doesn't need an audience. The world adjusts when they walk in. Chosen one, this final message isn't soft and it isn't decorated. It's the raw truth. Your comeback was never meant to be a spectacle. It wasn't supposed to be loud or flashy. It wasn't a movie montage with dramatic music. It was built in the quiet hours where nobody sees, nobody claps, nobody comforts. The nights you held yourself together with shaking hands, the mornings you woke up drained but still chose to try. The afternoons where healing felt pointless, but you refused to fall back into the arms of chaos. They thought your silence meant you were finished. They thought your disappearance was the end of your story. They thought your breakdown was permanent. But what they didn't know was that silence is where chosen ones sharpen themselves. You weren't gone. You were upgrading. You weren't defeated. You were reconstructing piece by piece, like someone who knows their future requires strength, not sympathy. Your comeback didn't begin when people noticed you again. It began the moment you stopped bending for validation. It began the moment you stopped explaining yourself to people who weaponized your honesty. It began the moment you stopped performing pain for people who enjoyed the show. It began the moment you stopped needing an audience to believe in your rebirth. Imagine them now, scrolling, creeping, whispering, replaying everything they once did to you, waiting to see some sign of collapse, and instead being hit with the reality that you've become untouchable, not because you fought back, not because you got revenge, but because you healed into a version of yourself that doesn't even live in the same emotional universe as them. And I know you've wondered, does anyone even see how hard I've worked to come back? Chosen one, they don't need to. You didn't rebuild for applause. You rebuilt because your spirit refused to die in a place it was never meant to stay. The real victory was never supposed to be public. The real victory was private, internal, sacred. You're not loud now because you don't need to be. You're not trying to be seen because your presence speaks louder than performance ever could. You don't need to announce your evolution. People feel it before you open your mouth. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. Your peace is the proof. Your transformation is the kind that walks into a room and shifts the temperature. Your energy is the kind that makes the past irrelevant. Your presence is the kind that makes old narratives look childish. You didn't come back to show them who you are. You came back to remember who you are. They don't get access to this version of you. They don't get to clap for a comeback they tried to prevent. They don't get to rewrite a story they no longer exist in. Your peace is louder than any revenge arc. Your elevation is sharper than any clapback. Your glow is the one thing they can't steal, sabotage, imitate, or destroy. This isn't just a comeback. This is closure without conversation, growth without witnesses, and freedom without permission. Chosen One, legends don't return to the battlefield. They build a whole new world where the war never mattered. And now we are stepping out of this final truth. Chosen One, you can feel the shift, the kind that settles into your bones and refuses to be forgotten. You didn't just survive the war, you rewrote the entire ending in silence and walked out undefeated. If this message hit you where it needed to, make sure you keep this energy alive. Like the video, subscribe to stay aligned with this mission. Drop the number 77 in the comments so I know you're locked in. And share this with someone who needs the wake-up call. Your story isn't ending, it's finally beginning.